Welcome to the opening plenary for the National Program of the Social Finance Forum. For those of you just joining us, my name is Vinod Rajasekaran. I'm CEO and Editor-in-Chief of Future of Good. I'm thrilled to be hosting the opening plenary to explore contributions to social finance from across Canada's ecosystems, examine social finance approaches and lessons from other jurisdictions for the ecosystems in Canada, and have our speakers share some insights on what transformations they'd like to see in social finance over the next decade. I'm joined by four incredible leaders from across the country and the social finance landscapes. So let's add the speakers, and I'll turn it over to the speakers to quickly introduce themselves. And Béatrice, let's start with you.
Hi, my name is Béatrice Alain. I'm the Executive Director of the Chantier de l'économie sociale that works in Quebec to promote and create tools for the social economy. And some of those tools include social finance funds.
Super. Merci, Béatrice. Kristi?
Hi all, I'm Kristi Fairholm. I am from Thrive Impact Fund. I'm the Managing Director. I'm located on the traditional territories of the Algonquin-speaking nations, also the unceded territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. So, and we're a place-based fund, investing with flexible and equity-like debt into nonprofit charities and social enterprises. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Kristi. Ilse?
Hello, everybody. Ilse Treurnicht. I'm a managing partner at Twin River Capital, a newish impact investment firm based in Toronto.
Super. Welcome, Ilse. And Jullisa, let's go to you.
Good day, everyone. Jullisa Brown here from the Table of Impact Investment Practitioners. I'm so glad to join you and tap in my ancestors today, Marcus Garvey, who really thrives on empowerment for the African diaspora. So glad to speak with you all this afternoon.
Wonderful. Welcome, Jullisa. I want to open with a broad question and really have you folks sort of reflect a little bit on and share some insights on how does Canada's social finance and impact investing practices compare with some of the global practices that you see? And, I'm curious, do you think we're a leader or a follower? Jullisa, let's start with you.
Absolutely. So I think that there's a lot of great things happening in Canada, which, we'll get to have a chance to learn more about today. Of course, there has been a history of social finance that goes back to before the NAB was initiated in 2014. But somehow social finance still kind of seems a bit fresh from within the ecosystem. Of course, there are a lot of great leaders and representatives doing great work. But again, like from the inside, I still hear folks asking questions regarding, who's doing what? How can we collaborate? What are the pathways to building out a more catalytic capital across the country? What is unique to us here in Canada that's not so much around the globe is the conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that it goes without saying for us within Canada, we know that we live in such a melting pot with so many different cultures, and this really influences the ways that we do things with impact investing across our country. And so it's just a little bit of a different angle or conversation. Around the world, other countries are talking about mobilizing private capital for public good. Folks are talking about taxonomy, clean energy, gender lens investing. They're talking about pension funds. Where we sit, where TIP sits as a community of practice for impact investing across Canada, we're partnering with CAFID to reestablish the National Advisory Board on Impact Investing. And so with this work, we've been able to learn from other countries that are doing such amazing things. So for example, Impact Investing Ghana realizes that they're trying to solve a problem on low employment rates across the country. And the way that they're doing that is by activating fund of funds and bringing together pension funds to help them understand how they can directly impact low employment rates across the country. And so that's definitely something that we can follow. Some of the other themes, and I guess really more organizing what exactly our principles and practices are for Canada. Having a more unionized voice, it will be definitely important for us. I'd say the ways that we're following is like in government. Certainly a lot of other countries around the world have been able to lean more heavily on the way the government plays a role within social finance.
Right.
I'd say that, the Canadian government is doing great things with global affairs, helping other countries outside of Canada. Of course, we all know the rollout of the Social Finance Fund, but there's still more work to do in regards to bringing the government and foundations and pension funds to engage better within social finance here. Canada is one of the G8 countries, and so we do have this seat of leadership by default. I think it's just time that we stand more in this position with authority.
Right. But even with just as a quick follow-up there, Jullisa, even with the National Advisory Board with NAB, like we're lagging a bit, are we not?
Yeah, actually, so the National Advisory Board, what they're calling national partners now with GSG, was actually established in 2014, and so things were going okay in 2014, and through a change in the system within Canada, the National Advisory Board actually slipped through the cracks. So whereas other countries outside are expecting that Canada had started their National Advisory Board in 2014, they're expecting us to have that amount of work done, where we're still working to reestablish the National Advisory Board at this stage.
Right. Yeah. Super. Thank you. Kristi, we'll go to you next. You run a place-based fund. You're very involved in community finance. But there are a whole range of things happening in that space itself. In other jurisdictions, both across the country and abroad. How do you see the field in Canada in relation to the rest of the world, and what do you think? Are we leading?
I think we're learning. I think that we're pretty scrappy, and we're connected, and there's a great and amazing group of funds and communities that are trying to find new and innovative ways to support the amazing things that are happening in the community that we all see and benefit from. And so as a sector, I think there's places that we are innovating and trying and learning from other places. And I do think that we're not, I think we're doing good and we're growing and we're connecting and all of that. So I want to give a shout out to all the community and place-based funds that are doing the work. And I think that there's things that could be done that from other countries that we've done that could make this sector stronger, more abundant, able to meet the needs of communities, things like the states. So the states are pretty strong as the Community Reinvestment Act, which provides capital into a system of organizations called the Community Development Finance Organization, CDFIs. And those CDFIs have a mandate specifically to flow capital to communities that may face, may need additional resources to invest into their nonprofits, or may need to have a focus area such as in food security, or allows them to want to focus on Black entrepreneurs in inner cities, or whatever the area is that the community feels that there's a capital gap. It provides that capital flow in, provides a vehicle to do that allows to build not only capital but also programming. The system in the United States has been really effective at creating that avenue of risk tolerant, more flexible, more catalytic capital. And it also has provided a way for foundations to invest in the system as well. So, the United States has program related investment as a tool, which we have in Canada, but it's in the United States, it's set up so it's much smoother. And so that allows the foundations to unlock more significant amounts of capital back into communities. So I think we have some, I'm going to say, like infrastructure to build underneath place-based community and impact investment funds that we can take good examples from other places.
Right, super, thank you. Béatrice, we'll go to you next. Quebec has a very distinct ecosystem. Can you tell us about this? I think you're still on mute, Béatrice. There you go.
There we go. I think it's important to note that there's really a long history of social finance in Quebec. The creation of Desjardins 125 years ago was the result of the majority of the population of Quebec, i.e. rural francophone actors, not being bankable by Montreal institutions and finding different solutions to provide financial services for these actors and invest in these communities. The creation of the Caisse de dépôt et placement du Québec 80 years ago was really a reflection of the government saying we need an institution that will foster, yes, economic development, but also a certain decolonization, a valuing of our language, of our culture, promotion of Quebec actors within our economy. So very political objectives. The creation of the labor funds, the Fonds de Solidarité du Québec 40 years ago, and then Fonds d'Action, were not only created to maximize the pensions of their members, but to invest in the Quebec economy in a way to create better conditions for workers throughout our economy. And that's why they have tax credits, because they have an explicit social and political, if you want to call it, objective. And then the creation 27 years ago of Risque by the Chantier, which is the first fund exclusively dedicated to investing in social economy enterprises, i.e. without taking any capital, any ownership of those enterprises, which are owned by the community, was a major innovation to show that when you know how to analyze these projects differently, it's possible to invest and make viable investments, but also the impact of that investment in terms of, yes, job creation, but also regional development and more equitable economic development are really important. So throughout those changes, it has developed an ecosystem in Quebec where we have capital that's very much leveraged and invested by Quebec in Quebec from different points of view, government, civil society, for different populations. And it makes a distinct, I think, example throughout compared to the rest of Canada, which isn't to say that everything is figured out. And I think there are issues right now that we're looking at in terms of how do we ensure today in our major social finance initiatives that we are promoting and developing in better environmental practices, particularly in rural areas where there is a trade-off between maintaining certain services like a gas station, but also eventually bringing actors towards thinking about more sustainable practices. And the other one around diversity and equity. So are we reaching all types of population with this financing? Do we need to modify certain practices to accommodate for women-led projects, projects led by new immigrants, projects led by racialized groups? And so there's a lot of discussions and adaptation underway in that respect.
Right, super. Thank you so much. Ilse, you have engaged a number of jurisdictions around the world. How does Canada compare?
Well, you know, I think we came to this field with a lot of assets, right? You know, very long history of social innovation, the co-op movement, strong community foundations, the embedded social economy in Quebec, entrepreneurial communities, and amazing leadership across the country. So we've arrived at a lot of assets, but I would say in addition to what others have raised and outside of Quebec, where I completely agree with Beatrice, there is significant participation. When you look at the global stage, we see that we're still really lagging on institutional participation in impact investing, as well as, you know, really engagement of the philanthropic endowments. So that where the money lives, you know, is still not participating, which of course, you know, puts impact investing and social finance a little bit on the edge of how people view the deployment of investments, and that has ripple effects in terms of size and scale throughout the system. And I think there was a view in 2010 when the social finance task force looked at this, that, you know, by 2024 we'd be much further up that curve.
Right. And just let's quickly follow up on this one particular point. Between public, private, and community foundations, I think, you know, there's roughly about $140 billion in assets, and the vast majority of these assets aren't invested in impact. Ilse, what's going on here? Because this is a conversation, as you know, has been going on for more than a decade. Are there particular bottlenecks that you see for institutional investors?
Well, you know, first is we still treat investments and grant making as two completely separate universes that do not intersect, and that impact happens in grant making And of course, the question we should be asking is how much more impact can be achieved if the endowments of these philanthropic pools were aligned with the mission of the organization. So that's a big challenge. The flip side of that is that the landscape is, because of this emergence, is still populated with, relatively small funds, emerging managers, or early vintage funds, partly because it's so hard to get these funds off the ground and to scale. Although many of those fund managers have done highly relevant and important things in other lives, they are then met with these very conservative investment criteria from both the financial institutions and the endowment space. So obviously the social finance fund will hopefully inject a lot more capital into the space. And now we have to mobilize more and then really continue to build the case for social finance and impact investing. The only other thing I would say that is interesting, going back to what's happening around the world, the striking feature is that we're seeing both mainstreaming, so institutions coming in looking for institutional grade portfolios with market-based returns, and massive experimentation. And that experimentation is just accelerating as there's more pressure to shift capital to emerging markets where a lot of that experimentation is happening. And we need all of the above, not just around the world, but across Canada, because I would say the scale and complexity of our challenges are such that we have to respond at scale, but also deploy that capital with nuance and sophistication depending on the context and the issues at hand.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Jullisa. I want to come back to you just based on what Ilse was saying. How many philanthropic foundations are you seeing engaged actively in TIP? That's happening.
I would say that we are actually discovering or allowing philanthropic foundations to let us know how they see themselves within the impact investing ecosystem. I think that social finance intermediaries, social purpose organizations are, they know what they want from the foundations, but through the NAB, we're actually allowing the foundations to also state, how they see themselves in the picture. And so that's definitely something that we're working towards, ensuring that, the foundations can find their place and be a big part of, the conversations that's happening, rather than us just stating our needs and imposing that they stick around. But what I did just realize is that the three panelists here, Thrive, Chantier, and Twin River, are TIP members. And so I'm so glad that we're able to engage with them.
Yeah, super. Kristi, I want to go to you. In your comments, you said we're scrappy. And you also said we're clunky, but we'll just get into scrappy for now. But give us some balance here. Like, we've been scrappy for some time. We're still scrappy. Like, how scrappy is too scrappy? And where is the scrappiness actually a good thing? Because Ilse talked about it being highly experimental. And so on. But where is scrappiness good, and where do we want to sort of mature out of being scrappy?
Yeah, I think starting and running a fund is hard work, and the scrappiness is that there's a lot of people across the country who see a need in their community and see the gap that exists within the finance system and want to make a change around that, and that's where we came for sure. Is that we kept seeing amazing nonprofits not being able to access the right kind of capital to help them grow, and all these barriers that were in place in the traditional finance system as well as the granting system that created a gap that we thought we could solve through Thrive Impact Fund. The scrappy part is that we've kind of done it on our own, right? Like, we had incredible support from McConnell and the Solutions Finance Accelerator. But other than that, we started up, we've raised our capital, we've created an operating model that has allowed us to move forward. And the scrappy part is that the organization that supports us, Scale Collaborative, and Purple have put a ton of sweat equity into it and a ton of our own resources and all of that. And that's okay. But as if we keep having to ask funds to have a do-it-yourself kind of approach, and everybody's learning all the time independently, then I think we don't have a chance to move sort of that collective innovation, that collective wisdom into a system. So part of the goal is to, in the sophistication and growing of the social finance sector, is that we're able to create, here's the doorway in, here's the support and resources and needs, so that we can help emerging funds get into operating funds, and we can help operating funds get into scaling funds, and that we're able to see, and we can see like there's a lot of gaps that we have in order to build that kind of enabling infrastructure to allow funds to develop in Canada that are able to be innovative, able to be community focused or issue focused, able to think differently. And we are around, I was thinking about, we're around two systems. Like I have one system where I'm raising capital, and raising capital is an interesting journey. And I can have all these ideas of what I want to do. And then I encounter investment committees that are very, very traditional. And so there's a whole language to learn. There's a whole sophistication to create in order to walk into that. And there's a whole bunch of mind shifts that need to happen. So the conversations are deep and they get a bit existential, right? It's like, so what are we mobilizing capital for? Why is it somewhere else doing not great things when it could be here in community doing great things? Like we have to have those kinds of conversations. And so the more we have those conversations across, the more we're able to shift the mindsets into, thinking how we can deploy capital differently. And then on the other side, in us deploying capital to nonprofits and charities, cooperatives and social enterprises, is that there's also a mind shift there too. And there's a systems shift that happens there too. We have, again, a very traditional financing, legal agreements system. So our loan agreements, again, tie into a system that is very risk adverse, very trying to do things certain ways, built to protect an investor, and like it's set up that way. So we're having to rethink loan agreements and rethink how that works, and rethinking security and rethinking collateral. Like there's layers and layers of how the system has worked so far that we're trying to shift and change in order to unlock and make capital more accessible. And so it's complex work. My hope is that not only are we able to take that innovation and scrappiness and build a strong system of support for funds across the country, but we also are collectively then able to look at the overall financial system and begin to allow it to open up, allow it to be more accessible, allow it to think about risk differently, and to be able to take sort of that stuck capital into community in a really, really abundant way. And so that's kind of where we're going, but I'm just encountering all different kinds of stuff that if we work together would make it easier to do.
Beatrice, Quebec has a far more mature ecosystem, and how are you taken in when you see some of the sort of the newer sort of ecosystems across the country, the scrappiness that you see? How are there parts of the Quebec ecosystem as well that are highly experimental or is it quite mature and sophisticated?
I think with the challenges, the society challenges that we're faced with, we can't not be experimental. We can't not be constantly thinking what we can do better to support more inclusive, more sustainable economy. This being said, and I think Jullisa was making that point, I think a lot of what was built in Quebec was built because there was networking, there was discussions, there was learning from others about how did you do that? Why did it work? Should we do this together? Are we complementary? Those discussions really accelerated and strengthened the different funds that were created. The other point I would make is around how do we share information while respecting our distinctions? So I think Quebec is a really good case for saying that we have regional realities in Canada, and the notions that we're all going to have the same priorities or we're all going to come at solutions in the same ways is not true. It's very different in Quebec. The investors are different. The priorities, the vehicles to invest in are very different than they will be in the Maritimes, than they will be out west, than they will be up north. And so we also have to be, I think, attuned to that. And when we're listening and learning from each other, because I think there is things to be learned across Canada, and Quebec is part of the learners as well as the teachers. We need to be sensitive to adapting to our own reality, and sensitive that what worked in Quebec can't be taken and implemented lock, stock, and barrel in somewhere else. Every, I think, region, and to some extent populations, because we are seeing that, certain kinds of entrepreneurship in certain sectors, in rural realities, in certain kinds of populations, will have different vehicles or path to growth, and I think we need to be sensitive to that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you. I want to sort of go down this path a little bit on because a few folks have said that we're on a learning journey, and so I want to go down that path a little bit and perhaps explore what is from your vantage point, what is one significant barrier that you're seeing faced by social finance organizations, place-based funds, and how are they overcoming that? Perhaps Jullisa, we'll start with you, because one of the things that you mentioned is when we spoke earlier is that it really feels like everybody's raising capital, and it feels like that's sort of the mode that a lot of folks are in, and it's really tough. So particularly when it comes to the creation of catalytic capital. So how, give us a bit of a sense of how would you articulate that barrier, and in what way are you experiencing it?
Absolutely. I would say that, of course, everyone is looking to access catalytic capital at this time, whether it's the social finance intermediaries, what they call SFIs, whether you're a social purpose organization, what they call SPOs. Everybody is out there looking for catalytic capital. And it's very interesting because, social finance, although it's been around for so long, again, it's feeling like fresh, like we're starting from ground zero. And so it's interesting that we've been having this conversation about accessing catalytic capital. We've been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and still we're in a place where people are still struggling to find that catalytic capital. Of course, overcoming it is going to come with engaging the right people. It's going to come with talking to the governments, the foundations, the pension funds, the folks that are going to be able to provide catalytic capital. So I think we're definitely going to have to pull up our sleeves and ensure that these folks understand what the need is and where they need to meet us. But again, I think that from the SFIs, from the SPOs, everybody is sort of overwhelmed with searching for this capital. And it kind of seems like we're fighting each other for it. I've heard a lot of social finance intermediaries say that it feels like we're all competing for the same money, which of course, also doesn't help the social part of social finance, right? There's definitely going to have to be a lot of relationship building and trust building in order for a collaboration happen, so that we can overcome some of these barriers to accessing capital, because we shouldn't be fighting each other for it. We should simply be partnering and collaborating to ensure that impact is created straight across Canada. One thing that I've been hearing folks say, was the IRP, the Investment Readiness Program, did it really get the results that we were looking for? Are folks really investment ready? One of the barriers that we're seeing now is that social finance intermediaries, have a good understanding of what's going on, but now the SPOs, the social purpose organizations, there might be a disconnect in, the understanding that should be passed down that pipeline. And, there's another question of what is the pipeline? Pipeline is a word that we hear a lot now that the Social Finance Fund has rolled out, and now that we have our wholesalers, joining the pipeline and building the pipeline is definitely a big part of that conversation. And I wonder to myself, what is this pipeline? And who is standing in line? And who do we need to give line bypass access to? Right? We've been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think as an ecosystem, we've figured out the diversity. We're starting to include people more. But where's the equity? Where's the E in the DEI? Who is actually getting access to this funding, and who is a part of that pipeline? Do we need security that can provide some of these line passes out to the folks that are diverse and inclusive, that have been invited but are still not getting access to the funding? And so, with that, I'm actually excited and happy to share that personally, I'll be moving forward in another position in the ecosystem. I'll be stepping away from the tip table as an executive director. And, you know, I think that it's at a perfect time where the board is looking to step forward and take a lead a little bit more, while I go out and do the work by helping folks that are trying to make their way through the pipeline to get access to some of this funding. A big part of this for me will be stepping bigger into the facilitation space. I'll be doing a lot of work around distributive justice and helping us in the impact investing ecosystem figure out DEI so that it does not DIE.
Wow. Okay. I love the way that just sort of like wrapped there, Jullisa. Thank you. And so many gems in what you just said. And I think there's a ton of richness. We just got a couple of minutes here, and so I want to sort of like, you know, kind of have one question that I want to explore with you folks, and then we'll wrap. We're on this learning journey. There's lots happening. There are new ecosystems. There are mature ecosystems. There's regional variations and uniqueness, and you know, in all of this, there's, you know, a range of challenges, and we're also, you know, putting a foundational layer on equity and justice and inclusion. But, you know, given all of this, what would you say? You know, if you could say, here's one thing that's misunderstood about Canada's social finance ecosystem, like what would that thing be? Kristi, maybe we can start with you.
I think that there's still a real feeling that impact is risky, and I think that is still prevalent. And what that means is that when people think that impact is risky and think that it's something that it then creates ring fences. So then people put, oh, we'll only do 5 to 10% of our portfolio or endowment into impact. And so that's where we begin to get this idea that you need to put it over here and allow it to be kind of innovative or catalytic or concessionary or whatever, because it's risky. And we have seen over and over again that people are willing to take huge risks if it's in a different bucket, if it's in, you know, in a venture fund, or if it's in, you know, if I even in my portfolio a couple of years ago, you know, went down 11%. Everyone seemed to be okay with that. But in the impact space, it's deemed as risky. So it creates a real conservatism around that. And so I think we need to really change that misperception and that connection, and begin to think like that impact is necessary. Impact is the imperative. Impact is innovation, you know, and that it is where we should be directing more and most of our resources towards. And so if we can change that thinking, and also change and shift away from the idea that there's this fallacy of market-based returns. Market-based returns are something that always get somehow measured up, but there's never really a description of where that comes from, or how those returns are generated, or who sets the bar from that. And so to be able to look at, you know, like impact generated returns. And so to, again, shift some of I talked about mindset shift, like this is critical. We need to like shift away from this kind of concepts of like impact risky, you can make money and make impact, you have to make up market-based returns, to really taking a shift to be like, again, impact is innovation, impact is necessary, impact is the imperative, and that there's amazing things happening, and that it's the opportunity that exists in front of us. So I would say that's our old tropes that I think are getting ready to be put to bed.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And this reminds me, Ilse, you've talked about, you know, the narrative around impact investing and social finance in Canada. How would you characterize where the narrative is? You're on mute, Ilse.
I think Kristi is absolutely right. I mean, the narrative is still very much underdeveloped. It's a niche narrative, and you know, part of that is due to the fact that without the participation of mainstream actors, it's not in the public consciousness of Canadians, and Canadians don't even really understand what is possible through impact investing and social finance, because it's so difficult for them to access these types of products, and there's such limited awareness. And so So I think that's sort of part of this entangled narrative of impact is risky, and also, you know, us stepping away from, I think a narrative that I see in other markets is that people come at the impact space both from the finance side and from the impact side, and these worlds meet in a way that is blended, and that is part of the power of this this hybrid instrument. I have a very simple belief, and that is that if we create a wider variety and credible impact investing opportunities, and we make them readily available to Canadians, not just rich Canadians, Canadians will choose them. And that's how the narrative will shift. That's how pressure will build on banks. That's how pressure will build on donor advised fund holders and so on. And of course, that I'm hopeful about that, because we see the generational shift. We see more women making decisions on investing. But I think it's something that the community really needs to come together and invest in changing the narrative to we have to invest in the future we want.
Right, super, thank you. Béatrice, quickly, one thing that's misunderstood about the Quebec ecosystem.
I think the notion, I would say in Canada, that and to some extent in Quebec, that finance is for experts, and that those experts know best what they should invest in, is really has been shown in Quebec that doesn't have to be the case. Desjardins, which is a cooperative, the labor funds, the Risque, the FIFC, are operated by actors on the ground who are obviously wanting to be responsible with those funds, but want to ensure that they're going to where community thinks it's important. And I think if social finance funds are serious, if social finance investors are serious about wanting to change the game, then they need to be putting in the radical choice of sharing or ceding power for having community around there. And community means both regional, so if you're deploying in the Maritimes, are there people from the Maritimes around that fund making those decisions? If you're deploying, are the people around your board, do they look like the community that you're investing in terms of all forms of diversity? This notion that we want to transform society, but we're not really changing the structures of power and the returns to those who have the capital, that they get to decide what's important, both in terms of their returns of economic or otherwise, I think is a fundamental flaw. And I think the experience in Quebec is proof of concept that you can have funds run by actors that are viable and thrive and make a fundamental difference.
Amazing. Thank you, Béatrice. We are out of time, so I'm gonna wrap up here. This was super enriching and insightful. Thank you all so very much for joining. We're now going to transition to the plenary session on Canada's Social Finance Fund, an update on implementation and rollout. Thank you. See you there.